Okay, hello, and welcome back to the Build with Joy podcast. And today's episode is titled, What If You Just Tried? And you lean into possibility over fear. And now, how I kind of came up with this, I was like, you know what? I have been delaying doing this podcast and being consistent with it. I keep being like, yeah, I'm going to do it. And then I'm just like, oh my God, I don't have enough ideas. I can't continue it, or, I keep telling myself these stories that I'm inconsistent and that I don't know what I could even talk about, because what do I talk about, right? Like, I'm here trying to I am a life coach, and I've been working with people, and it's hard to explain sometimes what it is that I work with folks. And now at this point, I've worked with like probably over 50 people in the last 3 to 4 years. And I do a range of things. I help people with launching a business, breaking down their big projects, navigating their ADHD brain, or just brains in general, of when you're blocked, right? When you feel stuck and you know that you have this thing that you want to do. Maybe it's in transition, maybe you're in a career transition, maybe you're just trying to figure out what your next steps are. And I know this all too well in my life, just because of all of the things that I have tried to do, I have done. I've traveled around the world, I've quit my job multiple times, I've changed careers, I've launched businesses, and the reality is I have failed many times, so many times. But I realize that I don't live my life in this regrets mode, because I remind myself I hate living in the what if, right? Like, what if I would have tried that? Like, what if I would have done that? And I look at my life and I'm just like, okay, there's some areas that, yeah, I still wonder, what if I would have done this differently? What if I wouldn't have been so afraid? And a big part of that is this podcast where I'm like, what am I so afraid of? And the reality is just showing up and feeling judged, feeling like people won't understand me. But in the reality of things, when I look around myself or my life, I'm just like, people won't. At the end of the day, there are some people that won't get you, won't understand you. But how do you feel? How do you feel you've lived your life? Are you content? Are you happy with how you've tried to do things? Or at least just feel like I gave myself a shot. And, I always think of the version of me, the older version of me, that will look back and be like, that's exactly what you had to do, right? Even if it seems chaotic at the time. And I know a lot of that comes from my neurodivergent brain, from my upbringing. I completely understand that, but I also realize these are the things that have propelled me to where I need to be. So that's just a little background. And as I was thinking, like, okay, I want to come up with at least 4 episodes that I'm going to record today, and I'm going to schedule out for the month and just keep that consistency going and just set that little goal for myself. It doesn't have to be super long episodes, it doesn't have to be super short. Anyways, I'm just sharing my thought process here. And as I was going to turn on the podcast, I had a title in mind that I was like, all right, we're going to talk about this, and that's going to be the next episode. I open up where I host the podcast, and I see that I haven't published an episode since 2023, where I was like, what you can expect. So I told y'all, now we're jumping in 2 years later. But I also saw that there were over 50,000 downloads. And I was like, wait, what? Like, just all-time downloads. And I was like, this little podcast that I started years ago, before podcasting was really cool, and I just have not been the most consistent, has gotten 50,000 downloads. And then I looked even further, and it says in the last 30 days, I had 429 listens. And I was like, what? Like, I published an episode 2 years ago, and 400 people have listened to it. So if you are some of those 400, thank you. Thank you for listening to me. And then it kind of just reminded me, like, you don't know who needs to hear the things that you're going to say, right? You don't know who's listening, who's watching. And it kind of just gave me that motivation that I was like, well, one of my big dreams has always been like, oh, I want to have this podcast and I want to reach a ton of people and I want to have these amazing group programs and have these retreats and be able to talk in great spaces and, do talks again. And I've done some of these things before the pandemic, before I even thought of coaching as a business. I just was doing it and I was creating and there was no pressure. But I was like, okay, well, now I have pressure that this is my business. And, I'm in this like literal liminal space where I'm just like, I booked right now, currently being fully transparent, I booked a one-way ticket to Europe because something in me just felt like I had to be here. I don't know why. I'm now in Paris. I've gotten to have an amazing time celebrating one of my friends' weddings. And anyways, that's beside the point. The point is like, okay, I had this like innate whisper in my head that would not go away. And I was like, that's not reasonable. None of this is reasonable. And we're going to find out maybe, months, years later, why it all worked out. Or maybe I'll go back home. And I was like, that was an amazing time. And I learned so much. It doesn't matter, right? In the end, I realized, okay, well, what if I just tried to live out my dream? What if I just tried to be consistent? Because I have been coaching and I have been getting clients and I've been working with people and I've been very like low key about it. I've been like, okay, I'll like post on my Instagram stories and I'm like, okay, well, the people that follow me and have been, following my journey for the last like decade, they trust me, whatnot, right? Or I've come through referrals and it's great, but I haven't had to be like loud and vocal about it and been like, hey, like I'm literally a certified coach, right? Like I literally did like 2 years of programming, of training, and I've done all these other things. And I was like, okay, well, I need to try, right? So I'm sharing this in now sharing with you to look like what is the motivation behind that, right? So maybe this inspires you because I was like, I'm living this, but I also know that like these thought-provoking questions really just like help us to move forward and actually move through and reach our goals. So that's the background story. That's my little story of why this topic came up. And now we're going to just really dig into the topic of the episode, right? So I really want to just touch on what it is to try, right? About why, it is something so beautiful and it's terrifying, but it's also just freeing of just trying, right? The thing, that idea that in your heart, it just keeps whispering, right? Where there's that thing that you're like, I've always wanted to do this, right? Like maybe it's, I've wanted to start a business. Maybe it's, I wanted to go after that career. Maybe it is, I wanted to put myself out there and try to be in a relationship. Or maybe it's, I wanted to launch a podcast, right? It could be a little thing, right? Maybe it's like, I wanted to travel to Italy, right? Or I want to, try living in these places. And I say this because I've done it, but maybe you have that whisper, right? Something. So I want you to sit for a moment. You're going to take a deep breath. I'm also grounding myself. And I want to ask you, what is that little whisper? That whisper in the back of your head? That thing that does not go away as much as you try, that is telling you, we need to try. Right? So I want you to kind of sit with that in this episode. So it's not about really pushing yourself. Like you have to do this, right? If you're a failure, if you don't even try, right? Like that's not my vibe at all. And that's not what I'm trying to tell you. But rather meeting yourself where you're at right now. So maybe the thing that you've been holding on, that little dream, that little desire. And I want you to meet yourself where you're at. And you're like, oh, okay, this is something I've been wanting. And just checking in with yourself. We're not judging it. We're just seeing like, what is the thing we want to try? And maybe why haven't we? Right? What's going on here? And then we're going to choose to take a little tiny step forward, right? And that's it. That's the invitation, right? That's the intention for this episode, for this thought as you kind of let it ruminate in your head. But I also want to kind of talk about the neurological aspects of this, the neuroscience, right? Of why maybe we haven't tried, right? Because we're not shaming that part of ourselves. I believe in like the timing's right, that it's something higher above us, everything works out, right? And there is no right, perfect time. But really, we want to think of like, well, why haven't we, right? And a big thing is how our brains work, right? A lot of our brains are not designed to make us happy. That is not the purpose of our brains. And you're going to hear me say this over and over and over and over again. But the purpose of our brains is to literally keep you alive. That is it. It is just trying to make sure that you are staying alive, whatever it takes. And a lot of that can be influenced based off our lived experience. So maybe you had an experience where you did try and things got scary and it felt dangerous. So then the brain tells you like, no, we're not going to try again because that was dangerous. Because the last time that we did that, that happened, right? And it really tries to prevent us from sometimes moving forward, moving towards our goals because it's trying to keep us safe. And sometimes that safety means staying put, right? Staying in that same spot. So I'll share something personal with you, right? Like, so I have been, one of my biggest fears is one, being seen, being visible, being out there, right? So I'm like, okay, well, the last time that I started a podcast or that I was like very online, it was overwhelming for me. And this is like, actually, I'm noticing this as I'm talking about it. But, something that came up for me was then a lot of people wanted my attention, my time. And I was like, okay, and this is actually like probably a good problem, but I am actually, very bubbly, but I need a lot of alone time. I need a lot of decompressing. And for me, it was overwhelming, right? Or, then it was, I felt judged by even people I was dating, right? Or, I was judged by people I thought were friends. And I also felt like people that I met had these unrealistic expectations of me or just had this one-way perception of, okay, so where I was recording cut off. And anywho, we're gonna keep trying because that's the intention today. We're gonna keep trying. So what I was saying, right, I had all these fears of being seen and perceived. And really, if we look at it, what is my end goal? And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to use myself as an example as I'm kind of guide us through how we try, right? And what is it that is stopping us? If we look at it from a different perspective, it was like, well, these are good problems to have. But my brain was terrified, right? And I'll share actual examples, right? Where I was starting to get noticed out and about. Like I was at a restaurant and someone was like, oh my God, I follow you online. And I was like, right? And this might sound like a good problem, and I'm sure it is. It is a good problem, right? But I started to get scared because I let my brain create meaning out of that, where to me, based off of past experiences, based off of past trauma, based off generational trauma, was telling myself, if you let people in or if people see you, they're going to take advantage of you. Right? That was the unconscious story that I was playing in my head and was also just really not noticing it, right? So now we're bringing it up and I'm like, that sounds silly, right? But that's how deep it was, where our brain, based off past experience, is like, how do we keep you safe? And for me, that was a lot of unpacking and figuring that out to even notice that's what's happening. Even now, as I'm saying, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's what happened, is really just a prime example of how my brain, even though it saw something good, where, I was being recognized, right? That was leading to opportunities. My brain was like, no, you're not safe if you are seen. So we need to just look at that, right? Like what is our brain trying to do and why is it trying to keep us safe? And it's not because it's trying to sabotage you, but really it's just trying to keep you safe based off past experiences. So what we want to try to see is like, okay, what's that pattern? What am I letting this mean? And how can I create safety? right? And how can I kind of just really get curious about it? That's really what I want you to lean into, is just getting curious about this. So we kind of move into like exploring different scenarios, right? Where we're just like, okay, brain, I know you're trying to keep me safe. Let's see if that's true, right? And I'm sure if you're anything like me, you are probably someone who is great at the worst case scenario, right? And this can be useful. For me, I used to work in operations at tech companies, and I've worked in logistics. And for that, I'm just like, yeah, worst case scenarios are great. Like, I have to think about worst case scenarios constantly, where I'm like, oh, if this happens, and then let's make a plan for that, right? So let's use that skill and let it work for us. Because at the end of the day, we're like, okay, if worst case scenario happens, like, oh yeah, blah, 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 right? You meet someone and they try to take advantage of you and blah, 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 blah. And at the end of the day, I was like, okay, well, what do I need here in the worst case scenario? Oh, I need boundaries. And that's really when you start thinking about it. And I was like, oh, for me, that means I just need boundaries. Like, I need to be able to say like, hey, I just need downtime, or like, I'm not comfortable with that. And really also need to trust myself that if that bad scenario happens, I'm going to know what to do in that moment. And I can trust myself, and I can set up structures in place to protect future me in case that happens. So that's just looking at the worst case scenario, right? And for me, that has meant, let's just plan for it. And at the reality is, if you are someone that has experienced, really negative situations, if you also have ADHD like me, what I have noticed in my life, and I know this for a fact in ADHD brains, is we're actually really good when these scenarios pop up, right? Where, funny enough, this is why, when I was younger, I was like, oh yeah, I have an anxiety disorder. Because I was like, yeah, when things are normal, I'm stressed. But when shit hits the fan, I'm great in the worst case scenario, right? Like, oh, that happened, boom. My mind focuses, gets stuff done. I'm, focused. I'm the person that you want in the worst case scenario moment. And at that moment, knowing this about me, I was like, wait a second. Like, if the worst case scenario happens, I know how to handle it. My brain goes into focus mode. I know how to handle worst case scenarios. So what we're trying to look at too is, okay, well, let's look at other scenarios. And I invite you to do that, because our brain likes certainty. So if we focus on just, oh, worst case scenario, then our brain starts to believe that's what's going to happen, right? So we want to just give our brains a little bit more movement, right? A little bit guidance out of that black and white thinking. So we're really thinking, okay, well, let's think of another scenario. And, you could keep doing this. This is a fun coaching exercise I like to do with clients that I'm working with. But I invite you to just at least think like, okay, let me think of, if you want to go full on best case scenario, but let's just think of like a different scenario, maybe a more neutral scenario, right? So I'm like, okay, what's another neutral scenario? Okay, I show up and I meet a lot of people, and I just meet a lot of people, and that's it. And nothing comes of it, but I just have met a lot of people. And I've exchanged pleasant moments, and they've heard my content, they decided it wasn't for them, or I meet someone in person, I'm like, okay, like, moving on. That's a little bit more neutral. Nothing horrible happens from there. Like, oh yeah, is that a possibility? Yeah, that's also a possibility. Okay. And now let's shift a little bit, right? So I don't know how this is feeling as I'm saying this. If you want to think about it in your own life, as I'm saying it, I was like, that felt a little bit lighter, right? It doesn't feel as like constraining, but I'm like, oh, okay, that's a little bit more neutral. So then what's a best case scenario? And actually, as I think of that, I get excited. Like, I start to tingle, and I'm just like, ooh, but it's also scary, right? And it's okay. And it's scary because it's different. So our brain's like, I'm not really sure, right? So think of it, okay, well, what could happen? Well, maybe, I put myself more out there. I get to interact with people who happen to open up doors and possibilities, or who want to work with me. And in turn, that leads me closer to the life that I've been wanting. What if, that leads to, and I'll just say it out loud because that's actually scaring me as I think about it, but it's a good scary, right? Where I'm like, oh, that's scary because it's different and it might actually lead to what I want, right? Where I'm just like, okay, yeah, if I put myself out there, people will maybe want to hire me and work with me. And I get to continue building my business where I can work from anywhere. And I get to also help people shift their lives and have that ripple effect where, I've gotten to work with a lot of people who are business owners, entrepreneurs who work in the social impact space. And I literally see all the cool things that they're doing. And I'm just like, I'm just like a little ripple in there, right? Just like help them reframe some stuff, think bigger. And I'm seeing the impact that they have that I could never do on my own. So for me, that's exciting because I'm like, the world is a scary, shitty place sometimes. And we need a lot more people that are amazing and that have big ideas and that want to do good and want to impact the people around them. And as I'm saying that, I get kind of chills. I'm like, okay, that could happen, right? If I just lean into this and I put this out there because I don't know who's listening. And then even bigger on my personal life. And I'm like, yeah, that could mean that I get to have my own home, right? And that I can live somewhere where I've always wanted to, right? Where I get to just have my own space that belongs to me. And maybe that means that I'm in the right place at the right time and I meet someone that I can build a life with. And oh, that even scares me. Like I get tingles, right? My eyes get watery because I'm like, yeah, that's something that I really want. So I'm like, okay, that could be the best case scenario. And that's scary for me because it's terrifying because it's admitting something that I've always wanted. And at the same time, I'm like, okay, that's what it's showing me. Like the emotion that it's coming up, I'm afraid because I don't like, what if I don't get that? And that's the best case scenario. And at the end of the day, I'm like, well, if I don't try at all, then I'm guaranteed that I won't get that at all. Then we're just like, yep, we stayed in the worst case scenario, maybe a little neutral, and we never even tried to go for the best case. So why am I sharing this? One, being a bit vulnerable, sharing my story out here, and to show that, I'm on this journey as well. And I've just gathered lots of tools along that journey. But it also means, the worst case scenario isn't necessarily true. And I want you to ask that, like, okay, well, is the scenario true? Maybe, maybe based off past experiences. Sometimes you're just like, no, 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 for sure. Like, if I do this, this will happen, right? But sometimes we're just like, well, it could be different this time, right? Obviously, trust your instinct, your intuition, but also question, right? These data points that our brain are trying to process. And, it's really just being like, what are you trying to protect me from? Okay, what can I do differently? What can I try, right? And just continuously asking yourself, is this true? Right? So I want you to kind of, I've shared a bit, I've given some tools. I want you to start thinking of something that you are avoiding, right? Maybe that thing that's like brings up the tingles and excitement, but it's scary. Right? It's scary to think of like, okay, could this be a possibility? Could it be something that I want? And really just start to think of like, okay, well, what if I look at these as different paths? And I would invite you to look at it in that way, right? Like if you're kind of at a crossroad, best case, worst case, neutral case, what is the one that gets you more excited? The one that feels like it's calling to you and you don't exactly know what it looks like. And what does that feel like? What does it feel like in your body? If you heard me, I was saying like, oh, that feels lighter, right? This feels more tingly, more exciting, and it feels more true to me, right? So I would really invite you to just listen to what that sounds like, what it feels like in your body as you think of these scenarios, and start thinking like, how can I build trust in myself that I can move forward, that I can take the tiniest little step. So just gonna add in a little tiny coaching moment here. So I'm gonna invite you to, well, if you're driving, do not close your eyes, just focus. But if you're somewhere where you can, I would invite you to just close your eyes, just lean in, and really just think of like, what has been nudging in me? Like, what has my soul been asking for? What has been, so deep, deep inside of me, that thing that just won't go away? Okay. And invite it like, okay, well, what if you just tried? What would be the first tiniest step? Maybe it's just acknowledging it. And that could be the first step. Like, okay, this is something we want. Maybe it's just like, okay, well, maybe I just start looking at my options. Maybe I just get curious. I would invite you to just answer that for yourself. What is the first step that I can take? So you don't need to know what's going to happen. The reality is you don't know what's going to happen. You can try to figure out as much like divination, try to ask everybody for advice, try to get all the opinions, pull tarot cards, whatever it is that you think you're like, I need to know for certain. But the reality is you don't, right? The only thing you can control is what you do next, right? You can't control what other people are going to do, what they think of you, what they're thinking. We don't know. And the only thing you do know is, well, I have a choice right now of the next step that I can take. And that's really it, right? So just thinking of that, like, okay, what is just the next step towards that goal, right? Towards that dream? What is that tiniest step? So I invite you, if you'd like, to journal on this, to talk it out, shoot me a voice note or something if this resonated with you. And I really just think of like, what are the tiny, tiny, tiny little first steps that I could take? So if this resonated with you, I'd love to hear what you're thinking. Feel free to shoot me an email. And also I'd like to let you know that this is what I do as a coach, right? Like I like to hold space for other people to ask questions, to really get deep into your brain, to really help you build that goal, to figure out what that is, to even get clarity as to what you want and what you want to start build. And then we start to build, and then we break it down. Right. And I'm really lucky that I've had a lot of experience working in tech, working in content creation, building businesses, that I can offer my expertise and lived experiences as well. But at the end of the day, what I realized, it's a lot of our own blocks that we get in our own way. So what I'd like to offer you, if you feel like you want to work with somebody, I do have one-on-one coaching that I do. I have a couple of spots in the fall that we can start to work together. And I am opening up a group coaching program. This will be the third cohort where we will hold ourselves accountable and really just work together as a group for 6 months, set a goal and stay focused on that goal. So it's more accountability. We break it down, we learn from one another, and we open up, right? We kind of get through those things, as well as some challenges that I have for folks. So if you're curious on either of those, feel free to book a call with me or reach out. And yeah, I'm really excited to help you keep building with joy. And I hope that this podcast episode resonated. And I have a couple more episodes that I'll be doing. So if you want a little dose of joy, this is your spot to come back to. And like I said, I'm just going to aim to be consistent on what makes sense for me. And that's what we're going with for next. And I'm really just promising myself and you, but mostly myself, to be honest, that I'm just going to try. And that's it. That is the goal here. So anyways, thank you for coming and listening to my rambles. I would love to hear from you. Thank you. Bye.